The terminal at Pearson hadn't slept in 3 days, and neither had Declan Marsh. Not the real kind of sleep, anyway. The kind where you actually wake up on the other side of something. He'd been moving through the last 72 hours the way a man moves through water, slowly with effort, and with the constant low awareness that he was running out of air. Gate C-14 was quiet now. It was 2:20 in the morning, and the storm that had buried most of southern Ontario under 40 centimeters of snow had grounded everything from Buffalo to Ottawa. The concourse had that particular stillness that only airports know. Not peaceful, not empty, just paused, stranded. A few dozen passengers slumped in chairs with their coats pulled over their shoulders. A child slept across 2 seats, her sneakers still on. Someone's abandoned coffee sat cooling on a windowsill, the snow pressing flat and white against the glass behind it. Declan Marsh stood near the end of the gate, hands in the pockets of his coat, looking at nothing in particular. He had not planned to be here. He had not planned to be anywhere. That was the truth of it, though he hadn't said it aloud to anyone. His assistant thought he was attending a board strategy session in Vancouver. His executive team thought he was taking a week of personal leave, the first in 4 years. His sister had left 3 voicemails he hadn't listened to. The hotel in Victoria had his credit card on file and a reservation he had no intention of honoring. He had just needed to get on a plane, any plane, away from the building he'd spent 11 years constructing into something that bore his name. From the boardroom where 8 days ago a vote had gone 12-1, and the one had been him. Declan was the founder and CEO of Northfield Systems, a mid-sized infrastructure software company based in Toronto. He had built it from a leased desk in a shared office in Kensington Market to a firm of 340 people with contracts across 4 provinces. He had believed, genuinely and without performance, that what they were building mattered. Software that managed water treatment facilities, grid monitoring systems for remote northern communities, tools that made things work quietly, invisibly, reliably, the kind of infrastructure that nobody noticed until it failed. The vote had been about selling. A private equity group out of Calgary had made an offer, and the board, reading the numbers the way boards always did, had decided that selling was wise. Declan had argued for 4 hours. He had brought documents, projections, testimonials from municipal partners. He had laid out a 10-year plan with the precision of someone who had spent a decade making things that held. 12-1. He walked out of that meeting and did not go back. He'd driven to Pearson without luggage, stood at the departures board for a long time, bought a ticket to Victoria because it was the farthest domestic flight, leaving before midnight, and then sat in this terminal while the snow came down and canceled everything, including him. Now he stood here at 2:20, and the gate was closed, and his flight was officially delayed until morning at the earliest, and he found he didn't particularly care. He found, in fact, that he didn't particularly care about very much. That was what frightened him, not the anger. Anger he understood, anger was fuel. It was the absence of it, the flat, gray quality of everything. The way the lights in the terminal felt far away. The way other people's conversations seemed to be coming from another room. He had felt this before. Once, a long time ago, in a small apartment in Hamilton, in mid-20s, before there was a company, before there was anything. He had felt this exact quality of silence inside himself, and it had taken him somewhere he did not like to remember. He had promised himself after that he would never let himself get that quiet inside again. He was very quiet inside right now. There was a small cafe at the far end of the concourse, one of the airport's overnight operations with the lights turned down to about half, a handful of laminate tables, and a display case of food that had been sitting out since the previous afternoon. A hand-lettered sign on the counter said still open, storm hours. He walked toward it because walking was better than standing, and standing was better than sitting, and all 3 were better than what his mind did when he gave it nothing to do. The woman behind the counter was in her late 20s, maybe early 30s, with her dark hair pulled back and a smudge of something, flour, maybe, or powdered sugar, on the left cuff of her uniform. She was wiping down the steam wand on the espresso machine with the focused, methodical care of someone who had run out of other tasks and was making do. She didn't hear him at first. He stood at the counter for a moment, watching her work, and something about the scene, the low lights, the empty cafe, the snow making the windows opaque, pressed on him in a way he couldn't name. She looked up. "Oh, sorry." She set down the cloth immediately. "No fuss. I didn't see you come in. What can I get you?" Just coffee, he said. Whatever's already made, I can make fresh. It's no trouble. She said it like she meant it, not like the script. You don't have to do that. I know. She was already grinding beans. You look like you've been sitting in that terminal for a while. Few hours, he said. Flight to Victoria. He looked at her. How did you know? That gate's been the sad one all night. She said it without pity, just plainly, the way you state weather. Storm grounded everything going west around 9. You're not the first person to wander in here looking like the floor gave out. He didn't answer that. He pulled out a stool and sat down at the counter, something he hadn't done at a cafe counter in years. He was the kind of person who took meetings in glass-walled boardrooms and had his coffee brought to him by an assistant who remembered exactly how he took it. This was different. The stool was slightly uneven. The counter had a ring stain near his elbow that hadn't quite come off. The espresso machine made a sound like it was working harder than it wanted to. She set the coffee in front of him. Small ceramic mug, not a paper cup. Dark, no foam. Thank you, he said. There's sugar there if you want it. She gestured at a small jar. Then she went back to her side of the counter and started restocking the cups on the shelf behind her, her back to him, not hovering. He appreciated that. He drank the coffee slowly. It was good, genuinely good, the kind of thing that surprised you in an airport at 2 in the morning. He didn't say so. He just held the mug and looked at the snow against the window and tried to locate himself inside his own chest. He couldn't quite. After a while she turned back around, refilling her own small glass of water, and she noticed. He could see it in the slight pause, the quiet way she didn't immediately look away, that he wasn't okay. Not in the way people aren't okay when they're tired or frustrated about a canceled flight. In the other way, she didn't ask him if he was all right. He was grateful for that, too. You want anything to eat? She said instead. The croissants are from yesterday, but they're still decent if you warm them. The muffins are from this morning. Blueberry, cranberry, orange. I'm fine. She nodded and let it go. The next 20 minutes passed quietly. He finished the coffee. She brought him another without asking. A couple came in around 2:40, exhausted and short with each other the way couples get after too many hours in a terminal, and she managed them gently. Right table, right order, a small joke about the snow that made the woman laugh unexpectedly. When they settled into their corner, she came back to the counter, dried a few glasses, then stood near the window for a moment and looked out at the storm. Does it stop? He asked. He meant the snow. The forecast says by 6. She tilted her head slightly. But forecasts tonight haven't been great. He almost smiled. Not quite. She glanced at him, not intrusively, just the way people glance when they're deciding something. I'm Circe, she said, in case you're here until morning and it gets weird that we haven't introduced ourselves. He looked at her. Declan, he said. Declan. She repeated it like she was making sure she had it right. Okay. That was all. She went back to what she was doing. Around 3:15 she brought a cranberry-orange muffin and set it beside his mug without comment. He hadn't asked for it. He looked at it, then at her. You've been sitting here for 40 minutes and you haven't eaten anything, she said simply. You don't have to, but it's there. He ate it. It was good. At some point. He wasn't sure exactly when. The couple in the corner left, and it was just the two of them and the storm and the low hum of the refrigeration units and the snow that kept coming, steady and indifferent. Circe had moved to the far end of the counter and was writing something in a small notebook. Not her phone, an actual notebook, the spiral-bound kind with a soft cover, the kind you buy at a drugstore. She wrote for a while, then paused, then wrote a little more. He found himself watching her in the way you watch something that is simply and quietly alive in a room that has felt dead. What are you writing? He asked. She looked up. A letter? To someone here? No. She closed the notebook gently. Just someone I think about sometimes. I don't always send them. Sometimes writing it is enough. He looked at the notebook. Does that actually work? She considered. Sometimes. When the thing you're carrying is too heavy to just sit with. She paused. And sometimes you don't know what you're thinking until you see it written down. Then you can actually look at it. He didn't say anything. She picked up her water glass. Is there something you're carrying tonight? It was the simplest question. It was also the most direct thing anyone had said to him in 8 days. Maybe longer. He looked at the snow. I built something, he said after a moment. For 11 years. Something I believed in. And a week ago a room full of people I trusted decided to hand it to someone else for a number on a page. She was quiet, listening. And I know that's a business outcome, he continued, because somehow the words were moving now and he couldn't find a reason to stop them. I know that other people have real problems. I know it's not. I know what I'm describing is a privileged loss. He stopped. But it feels like I handed someone my. He didn't finish the sentence. Like you handed someone your reason, she said quietly. He looked at her. Yeah, he said. Like that. She didn't try to fix it. She didn't tell him it would be okay or that he'd find something new or that the best chapters were ahead of him. She just nodded, like what he'd said was real and true and worth receiving. I'm sorry, she said. That's a real thing to lose. They sat for a moment in the kind of silence that doesn't need filling. Around 4 in the morning, Sawirsi's shift technically ended. Declan saw it. A younger colleague appeared from the back, still pulling on his apron, rubbing his eyes. She gave him a brief handover, pointed out the things that needed restocking, said something low that made him nod. Then she untied her apron and folded it over the counter. She put on her coat. She picked up her bag. She tucked the notebook inside it. She looked at Declan. Get some sleep if you can, she said. There are better chairs near gate C8, and the morning crew here makes better coffee than I do, honestly, so you've got that to look forward to. He almost smiled again. This time it was closer. Sawirse, he said. She paused. He didn't know what he meant to say. He wasn't sure there was a right thing. So he said the only true thing he could find. Thank you for not asking if I was okay. She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, I hope the morning is easier, and she walked out into the terminal, coat pulled close, and was gone. Declan sat alone at the counter for a while. The new colleague moved quietly in the background. The snow had not stopped. His flight was still listed as delayed. He had nowhere to be. He pulled a napkin from the dispenser on the counter and smoothed it flat. He picked up the pen that had been sitting near the receipt printer, a cheap ballpoint, the kind that catches on paper, and he held it for a moment. Then he wrote something. He wasn't sure why. Maybe because she'd said, sometimes writing it is enough. Sometimes you don't know what you're thinking until you see it written down. He wrote, You still built it. That doesn't go anywhere. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he folded the napkin, set it beside the empty mug, left a larger bill than the coffee warranted, because he didn't know what else to do with the feeling. He went to gate C8, found the better chairs, and for the first time in 8 days he slept. He did not dream about the vote. His flight boarded at 7:40. He was already back in Toronto by 10, because somewhere in the gray early morning, he had decided that Victoria was not where he needed to go. What he needed was not distance. What he needed was to go back into the building and start the thing he should have started 8 days ago, which was figuring out what came next. He told his assistant to cancel the leave. He called his sister back. He sat in his office on the 32nd floor with the city white and quiet below him, and he pulled out a legal pad and he started writing down everything he knew about water infrastructure in Northern Ontario that still had no adequate software solution. He did not think about the cafe very often, but when he did, it was with a specific kind of gratitude he couldn't fully articulate, the kind that comes, not being seen, in a moment when you had stopped believing you were visible. 6 weeks later, a position opened on his newly formed advisory team. He was looking for someone with operational experience in high-pressure, low-resource environment, someone who stayed calm, someone who paid attention. He had written the job description himself, twice, because the first version sounded too corporate and he'd thrown it out. When the application came in, Source Callahan, Airport Hospitality Operations, 8 years in multi-location food service management, a note in the cover letter that said she had a background in community outreach and was looking to move into a sector where the work had longer stakes. He recognized the name before he finished the sentence. He set the application aside. Then he picked it up again. He thought about it for 2 days because he was not the kind of person who made decisions from sentiment, and he had spent 30 years learning to know the difference between what he wanted and what was right. He called his HR director and asked her to put Sawirse Callahan through the standard process. No shortcuts, no signals. He did not tell her why he recognized the name. Sawirse made it through 3 rounds before she was brought to him. She walked into his office on a Tuesday morning in February, the lake flat and gray through the window. Behind him, her coat slightly damp from the cold. She was composed, professional, dressed simply and well. She had the kind of composure that comes not from rehearsal but from experience. The composure of someone who has managed a lot of difficult moments and learned to stand inside them. She did not recognize him immediately. He watched the moment it landed. Somewhere in the middle of the second question, when he said something that used the same phrasing he'd used that night at the counter. She stopped. Her eyes moved to his face. "Pearson," she said. "Gate C, 14. February storm," he confirmed. A pause. "Your Northfield Systems." "I built it," he said. "And then I came back and started building again." She looked at him carefully, not with the calculation of someone working out what this meant for her, but with the quiet, direct look of someone deciding whether a thing was real. "I didn't know who you were that night," she said. "I know." He leaned forward slightly. "That's why I'm telling you now, because everything that follows needs to be straightforward." He paused. "You went through the same process as everyone else. You're here because you earned it. I want you to know that before we go any further." She nodded, slowly. "Okay." The role was his senior community liaison for the firm's new Northern Infrastructure Initiative, a project he had spent the last 6 weeks building from the notes he'd written on that legal pad. Communities across northern Ontario and parts of Quebec that were running water systems on outdated frameworks. Places where the right software, deployed carefully and maintained well, could make a difference that people would actually feel. She asked good questions. She pushed back on 2 of his assumptions in ways that turned out to be correct. She told him she didn't have a tech background, and he told her he wasn't looking for one. He was looking for someone who understood what it meant to keep things running under pressure, who knew how to talk to people who were exhausted and needed something to work. She took the job. Working alongside Cyrus O'Callahan was not what Declan had expected, though he found it difficult to say precisely what he had expected. She was thorough without being slow. She was warm with people in the field in a way that opened doors. He had watched her spend 40 minutes with a water systems operator in Kapuskasing, a man who had been skeptical of outside consultants his entire career, and by the end of it the man was showing her photographs of his grandchildren. She had a way of making people feel that she was genuinely interested in their problem, because she was. She was also honest with Declan in ways that his staff rarely were. Not unkind, she was never unkind, but direct. "That proposal language is going to land wrong in Thunder Bay," she told him once, dropping a document on his desk and tapping the 3rd paragraph. "You've written it for Bay Street. These are people who've been promised things Bay Street before." He read the paragraph. She was right. There were other moments. A drive back from a site visit in Sudbury where they talked for 2 hours about what they each thought infrastructure meant, not technically, but philosophically. She had grown up in a small town in Cape Breton, she told him, where the water went brown twice a year and nobody who was supposed to fix it ever came. He talked about his father, who had been a pipe fitter, and who had never understood what his son did for a living until Declan had taken him to a water treatment facility and shown him the software running it. And his father had looked at for a long moment and said, "So you're keeping the pipes from bursting." "That's right," Declan had told him. "That's exactly right." His father had died the following spring. Cyrus had listened to this without the effortful empathy people often performed. She had just listened and then said, "He knew what mattered. That's a good thing to know about your dad." There was a line between them, present and unspoken, the way lines are when 2 people are both aware of something and have agreed, without saying so, not to act on it yet. Not from caution or distance, but from a kind of care. Declan was aware that he was her employer, that the weight of that could press on anything fragile, and he was also aware that he needed to finish building the thing he'd returned to build before he could offer anyone anything real. He thought about that a lot in the winter and early spring. In March, a delegation from the municipality of Moose Factory reached out. The community's water treatment software was failing, a patchwork system that had been bought in 2009 and held together since with temporary fixes, and the goodwill of a single staff member who had taught himself the codebase over 15 years. The community's elected council wanted a meeting. Declan and Suerse flew up on a Wednesday morning. The meeting was long, 5 hours, with an afternoon break and a lunch that someone on the council's staff had made from scratch, and Declan thought afterward that it was one of the most important meetings of his professional life, not because of the outcome, but because of the quality of listening it required. The council chair, a man named Elias, spoke for 40 minutes at the start about what the community had been promised over 2 decades and what had actually arrived. Declan did not look at his notes. He looked at Elias. At the end of the day, walking back to the small hotel, Cyrus said, "That went well." "Because of you," he said. "The way you responded to Margaret in there, when she brought up the 2019 contract." You didn't defend it. You just said it was a failure and asked what she needed to feel like this time was different. Soirse was quiet for a moment. It was a failure, she said simply. Most people in that room would have explained it. Explaining a failure to someone it hurt doesn't fix anything, she said. It just makes the explainer feel better. He looked at her in the late afternoon light, the cold coming off the bay behind the town, the sky a particular shade of northern late winter that he had come to recognize. Wide and clean and pale, he said. I'm glad you came to work here. She looked at him. I'm glad I applied. There was a pause. Brief, waited. I need you to know something, he said. She waited. The night at Pearson, what you did, the way you were in that cafe, that's why I recognized your application. But it has nothing to do with why you're still here. You're here because of the work. He paused. I want those to be two separate and true things. She was quiet for a long moment. The cold moved between them. They are, she said finally. He nodded. They walked the rest of the way in silence, but it was the kind of silence that holds something rather than hides it. The Northfield Northern Initiative was formally launched in September, with Moose Factory as the inaugural partner community. There were 9 other municipalities in the first cohort. The software, rebuilt from the ground up by Declan's development team in consultation with field staff, tested over 8 months, was named, at Soirse's suggestion, Groundwork. At the launch event in Toronto, a panel discussion with community partners and government representatives, Declan spoke for 12 minutes. He did not talk about the board vote, or about Pearson in a storm, or about the night he had sat at a counter in the dark and let a stranger be kind to him. He talked about water, about the 140,000 Canadians still under long-term drinking water advisories, about what it meant to build something that held. Soirse sat in the 3rd row. When he stepped off the stage, she was standing near the back of the room, talking to the Moose Factory Council chair. He watched her for a moment. The way she leaned slightly toward Elias when he spoke, the way she laughed at something real, the way she stood in a room of polished professionals without seeming to need anything from them. He crossed the room and said something to someone he didn't know, and then someone else, the way you do at these things. But his attention was steady on its anchor. Later, when the room had thinned and the caterers were moving between tables, they ended up outside on the building's narrow terrace, the city below them in the autumn dark, the lake, a flat black line in the distance. Good night, she said. Yeah, he said. It was. She looked at the skyline. I want to tell you something, okay? That night at the airport, I didn't know who you were. But I knew something was wrong, not just tired, not just frustrated. She paused. I've seen that look before, on people who have stopped being sure there's a reason. He was quiet. I wasn't trying to fix it, she said. I know I can't fix something like that. I just. She stopped. I didn't want you to be alone with it. He looked at her. The city hummed below them, patient and indifferent. You weren't, he said. Because of you. She turned slightly toward him, and he reached out and took her hand, and she let him, and they stood like that for a while without explaining it or naming it, because some things don't need a name to be true. He still had the napkin. He had found it in his coat pocket 3 days after Pearson, when he'd reached in for his keycard and felt the folded paper and unfolded it and read what he'd written. He had kept it in his desk drawer since then, under a field report from Kapuskasing and a photograph of the Moose Factory Bay in winter. You still built it. That doesn't go anywhere. He had written it to himself and it had been true, but he understood now that it had only become true because someone had stayed with him long enough in the dark for him to believe it. He sent Soirse a message the following morning. 1 line. Still here, still building, and for the first time in a long time. That's enough, she wrote back 4 minutes later. Good, don't stop. He didn't.